So what happens when a mind that's trained in logic and skepticism runs smack into a question that reason just can't seem to answer on its own? Well, today we're diving into a story about exactly that, a personal quest for meaning that starts in one of the most traditional cultures on Earth and ends with a discovery that changes absolutely everything.
For me, religion is like a business. Okay, that's our starting point. It's a blunt, pretty cynical worldview, right? It's a perspective that sees faith not as some deep source of truth, but as a transaction. And this one single belief, it sets the stage for a transformation that is truly unexpected. And what makes that statement so powerful is who said it. I mean, this isn't just anybody. These are the words of a man whose entire family line traces all the way back to the samurai clans of Japan. So you've got this background steeped in honor and tradition, yet his mind was filled with modern doubt.
So, who is this man behind these words? To really get his journey, we first have to understand where his disbelief came from, the big intellectual puzzle that completely shaped his view of the world.
Okay, so let's meet him. This is Dr. Kyoichiro Sugimoto. As a student of cultural anthropology, he was used to analyzing religion from a distance, like a specimen under a microscope. He saw it as a kind of cynical business designed to get money from believers. And honestly, like a lot of people in Japan, he just assumed this life was it, the end, nothing after.
But his skepticism, it wasn't just some academic exercise. There was a deeper question that really truly bothered him. He would look out at the world and see this fundamental injustice, that a person's entire life, their health, their education, their opportunities, could all be decided just by the lottery of where they happen to be born. How could that possibly be fair?
And that deep sense of injustice, it's what set him on a path he never, ever expected. The answer he was looking for wasn't going to be in a book or in a lecture hall. No, it would come from a new friendship that would take him thousands of miles from home, on a journey to Bangladesh.
You know how these things start, right? It all began with something simple. He just wanted to practice his English. So Dr. Sugimoto befriends a student from Bangladesh, and that friendship turns into an invitation for a summer trip back in 1996. This was his first time ever leaving Japan, and this one single trip would challenge every single assumption he had about the world.
The contrast he saw was just immediate and profound. Back home in Japan, he saw this very controlled, work-driven society where, in his own words, people's eye is dead. But in Bangladesh, surrounded by what looked like poverty, he found the complete opposite. This incredible energy, this deep hospitality, and people whose eyes seemed to hold a kind of aura.
This experience just shook him to his core. It was more than just a cultural difference. He felt like he had encountered a fundamentally different way of being human. And it left him with this one all-consuming question. Why? What was the source of this spirit he was seeing in people who, by all the external measures, had so little?
He was totally convinced their values had to be rooted in their faith. So he came back to Japan on a mission. He had to find the, let's call it the source code, for the incredible spirit that he had just witnessed.
Now you have to remember, this was 1996. We're not talking about a quick Google search here. This was old school research. He went to a library, started searching for books on Islam, and he picked up a Japanese translation of the Quran, the primary source.
As he started to read, a couple of concepts just jumped right off the page at him. The first one was Tawhid. Now, coming from a polytheistic culture with no real clear definition of God, this idea of a single, indivisible, all-powerful creator, it was a revelation. It was so simple and it was so clear.
And then came the second huge concept, Akhirah. This one spoke directly to that question of injustice that had bothered him for so long. It was the idea of a life after death, a hereafter, where the scales of justice would finally and perfectly be balanced.
And suddenly, it was like a light bulb went on. He had a logical framework that directly addressed his core problem. The inequality he saw in the world wasn't the final story. Could this actually be the answer he'd been searching for his whole life? Everything he read in the Quran completely reframed his worldview. It presented this life not as the final destination, but as a temporary test. The circumstances you're born into, whether you have a lot or a little, that's all part of the test. And the ultimate justice, well, that's not found here. It's in the hereafter. For Dr. Sugimoto, this was the missing piece of the puzzle. The world, with all its unfairness, finally made sense.
So the intellectual puzzle was solved. Check.
But, understanding a philosophy in your head is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. The next step he had to take was the biggest one of all, going from being a detached observer to an active believer.
He realized he had basically hit a wall with academic observation. To truly understand the internal reality of this faith, to actually feel its impact, he couldn't just study it from the outside anymore. He had to live it. He had to experience Islam for himself.
And let me tell you, that experience came with some serious challenges. This was nearly 30 years ago in Japan. Finding permissible food was incredibly hard. There were only seven mosques in the entire country. He faced prejudice, of course, but the most personal struggle was trying to explain his new faith to his parents, who were just deeply resistant to it.
This journey with his parents? Wow, it took 20 years. His early attempts to explain Islam with logic just created more tension, so he changed his whole approach. He started sending gifts, he reassured them he'd always care for them, he just showed them love. And then one day, the breakthrough came from the simplest question. His father asked him, "Why do you have a beard?" And that opened the door for a 10-minute explanation of Islam's core beliefs. And in what he calls the happiest moment of his entire life, both of his parents accepted the faith right then and there, together.
I mean, what an incredible moment. It brought his family together in faith, but it was also the culmination of his own internal journey, a journey toward a profound sense of peace that had pretty much eluded him for his entire life.
And this internal shift was just massive. Before, he described his heart as unstable, just tossed around by the storms of a constantly changing world. But afterwards, he felt anchored to something permanent, to the Creator. Events that once seemed like random bad things were now seen as just one part of a much larger and ultimately good plan.
And he explains this new perspective with a really powerful analogy. He says that as human beings, we can only see the individual pixels of our lives, really up close. We can't see the full picture they're all forming. But the Creator, he sees the entire masterpiece.
And so when you ask him to boil it all down, to summarize the ultimate difference his faith made in his life, his answer is incredibly simple. It was finding a stability of the heart. That became his anchor in a world of constant change.
And that really leaves us with a question to think about, doesn't it? Dr. Sugimoto found his anchor in a very unexpected place. And his journey kind of prompts all of us to ask ourselves, in a world that is always in flux, what is it that gives your heart stability?